Hi everyone, DJ here. Welcome back to the channel. Every year, I do a tour of my layout showcasing all of the changes from the previous year. But I have a lot to say in terms of the lore and history behind the layout, so here I am to present that. My AU of the island of Sodor, based on my Thomas & Friends die-cast layout. I hope you all enjoy. In 1914, the Northwestern Railway was formed, a massive endeavour spearheaded by Sir Topham Hatt and the newly formed Northwestern Railway Company of Sodor. This wasn't the first railway on the island of Sodor, however. Several railways, including the long-closed Mid-Sodor, the Skarloey Railway, and the Caldi Railway had all been established previously, as well as 3 standard gauge lines. The Brendom and Wellsworth Railway, which ran from Brendom through Wellsworth and down to Farquhar, built 1872. The Tidmouth, Napford, and Maithwaite Railway, which ran from Tidmouth up to Maithwaite, built 1888 through the island's heartland. And the Sodor and Mainland Railway, built 1861, which by the time of the new railway's construction had been closed for some time, with only one landmark remaining, the old covered bridge at Crovan's Gate, but it had been abandoned and surrounded by the emerging town for some time. Otherwise, there are no rails, photos, or people and engines to remember the S&M, except for Neil, but nobody really bothers to ask him much about it anyway. The Northwestern Railway combined the lines of the BWR and the TKMR, building a loop line to Farquhar and a tunnel through Olstead Valley, also known as Misty Valley, to reach the line's terminus, Arlesdale, the closest point on the island to the mainland. The railway also accomplished many other feats, including a loop line at Arlesdale, a loop line and bridge over it at Maithwaite, and for the first time, full rail linkage for every major industry on the island. During its construction and inaugural operations, many engines were brought over from the mainland, including Thomas, Edward, Henry, and Gordon. There are many landmarks and things important to the island at Arlesdale End. Firstly, the bridge to the mainland, adjacent to which are 2 lighthouses. The one closest to the tracks was the original lighthouse that guided ships through the arduous Sodor Bay, constructed in 1862. It, however, fell into disrepair and was eventually bought by the Sodor Maritime Heritage Conservation Trust in 1978 and moved from its island perch to its current location. From there, the Sodor Shipping Company built a new lighthouse on the island, opening it in 1980. Across from the Arlesdale station is the Sodor Construction Company yard and main office. The company began with Mr. Packard in 1901. He originally based the company out of Maithwaite, but he struck a deal with the NWR, whereby if he moved his base of operations to Arlesdale and helped with the railway's construction efforts in that area and elsewhere, he would receive free shipping of his vehicles and materials around the island from the railway in perpetuity. Many vehicles have since come and gone from the company, and the ownership of it has passed from Mr. Packard to his daughter Miss Jenny Packard, and now to his granddaughter Miss Jerusha Packard. Jack, Alfie, Max, Monty, Kelly, Isabella, Patrick, Byron, Nelson, Ned, Buster, and Oliver live here. Moving slightly further east, we have the Sodor Airport. The airport has been on Sodor since the beginning of the First World War. The newly formed Royal Flying Corps felt Sodor was a prime location for training pilots, and thus an airfield was constructed in 1915. It was kept on as an air base by the British forces into the Second World War, where it played an instrumental role as an RAF base during the Blitz, until it was unceremoniously bombed during a nighttime raid in early 1941. The base did not see a full reconstruction until after the war due to limited resources and the RAF seeing it as a somewhat inconsequential base, leading to its eventual abandonment by the RAF and then conversion into an airport by the Sodor Transportation Board in 1955. The main building with its striking yellow and railway terminal access was constructed, and it has been serving the island ever since. Jeremy and Tiger Moth live here. The Arlesdale Miniature Railway is also situated along the Arlesdale End Peninsula, having a transfer yard next to the standard gauge station. In the yard, you can still see some of the old rails and sleepers from the changes to the yard over time. It is a fairly new railway compared to the other railways on the island, seeing its construction completed in 1962, which began in response to a deposit of rare minerals, predominantly emeralds, being found in some of the old tidal pools. Thus, the railway was constructed to help with mining operations, with minimum gauge being selected as it was easy to maintain in areas with changing tides and shifting sands. The railway also runs passenger and farm services for the local community as well. There are 3 prominent landmarks on the Arlesdale aside from the lighthouses. Arlesdale Manor, the summer home of Sir Topham Hatt, the towering Baptist Church, and the Seaside Clock Tower, constructed all the way back in 1803, when Arlesdale was a much larger town, thanks to its harbor, but now gone. At the time, though, the first and only harbor on the island. Jock, Frank, Mike, Rex, and Bert work on this line. Tracking east along the Arlesdale Peninsula, we come to the Olstead Tunnel, which brings us through the valley into Maithwaite, a charming little town situated on the north side of the valley, with Olstead Castle on the south. Let's talk about the castle first, shall we? Olstead Castle was constructed by King Godred, an 11th century king of Sodor, who was not really the king at all. You see, Sodor had a king at the time, King Crovan, who famously defended the island from a Norman invasion at what is now called Crovan's Gate. Now, King Crovan was the only male heir his father had, but he was born illegitimately, and thus it took a while for him to assert his place as the rightful heir of Sodor before finally being crowned king. Meanwhile, however, during the succession dispute, Godred, a Welsh noble who shared a common ancestor with Crovan's father, the ancestor's name has yet to be discovered, FYI, heard about all this, and using the ancestor as justification, proclaimed himself the rightful king of Sodor, headed to Sodor, and built Olstead Castle. Crovan, who was still asserting his rightful claim, didn't have the time or power just yet to deal with Godred. However, Godred wasn't making any major territorial gains against Crovan, firstly because he ran out of money, and secondly because he didn't have the resounding support of the Sudrians he had hoped for. Thus, the two kings ruled in tandem for about 200 years, until Crovan's line died out, and Godred, through intermarriage, was able to claim the succession, making Godred's line the undisputed rulers of Sodor, until the English showed up and took over everything, but you all get the gist. It is now owned by the Earl of Sodor, who purchased the at the time decaying castle, built the estate railway, and opened it to the public. Millie, Stephen, and Bertram work here on the estate railway. Tracking back to the north side of the valley is Maithwaite, which, sidebar, the valley has been called Misty Valley for centuries by the locals. However, Godred insisted on calling it Olstead Valley after his castle, thus leading to modern cartographers and historians discovering his records and officially titling the valley as such for modern maps, presumably because they didn't talk to any of the locals. But finally, on to Maithwaite proper. It is a quaint village that boasts a few landmarks and things important to the railway. First off, the island's mail depot is here. Percy shunts and picks up cars here regularly and is kept quite busy. There is also the bakery, Presbyterian church, and general store. There's also the multi-engine fueling depot, put there by the railway in the 1960s to accommodate fueling needs of diesels and steam engines running along the Maithwaite Loop Line, Crovan's Gate Branch Line, and any mainline trains who couldn't get all the way from Tidmouth to Arlesdale without needing to refuel. Terence the Tractor's fields and vegetable gardens are nearby, and it was there that he met Thomas for the first time. Thomas later on then getting stuck in the Olstead Tunnel in the winter, and Terence needing to rescue him. Hank, Flora, and Neville are stationed here. Maithwaite is also propped up by the nearby lumber mill, which gets its lumber from nearby trees in the valley. Many cite this mill's opening in 1899 as the demise of the Misty Island logging camp. The mill's yard is a part of the Maithwaite Loop, which you can access via the Crovan's Gate branch line, which tracks north and breaks off to the loop at a T-switch. The loop line runs under the massive Maithwaite Bridge. Originally a simple stone bridge, it was later extended via another girder bridge to accommodate the loop, becoming a super bridge that crosses not only the loop, but also a portion of the Caldi Railway as well. A rather unfortunate engine driver lives here in a house next to the bridge, Sigmund Perkins, son of well-known engine driver Mr. Perkins. The noise of engines passing on either side of his house keeps him up at night, and driving Billy in the daytime keeps his blood pressure at an all-time high. He cannot move, though, as his wife loves the house's architecture and won't settle for anything else. Now, of course, the Maithwaite Loop Line is only the first part of the Crovan's Gate branch line, which runs north from Maithwaite up to Crovan's Gate on the east side of Caldi Fell. The branch line's construction began in 1927 as it became more and more apparent to the railway company that rail linkage to the island's waste dump was needed. Crovan's Gate also already housed several machine shops, which the railway company was eager to buy out and convert to engine works, and thus construction began. The building took a long time to complete, however, as water runoff from the Caldi streams caused flooding in the spring of 1928, and a rock slide off the mountain halted construction for nearly 6 months in 1929. Eventually, despite the Great Depression in full swing, the branch line was completed by the summer of 1930, with the engine works, Crovan's Gate Station, and rails at the waste dump completed by 1931. Just before the line splits off from the main line is the Sodor Search and Rescue Center. Originally the Maithwaite Fire Station, built in 1888, the fire brigade began adding more and more pieces of equipment as the island's population grew. With the NWR's completion in 1919 and a greater need for railway emergency equipment, they added small amounts of rail access and breakdown equipment. By 1958, however, it was very clear that an entire rescue division was needed on the island that can include fire, water, rail, and road services. Thus, several new buildings were built, the old firehouse renovated, and the Sodor Search and Rescue Center opened in 1959. The original firehouse still sits in the middle of the center, and the Misty Island Tunnel is nearby. Flynn, Bell, Harvey, Harold, Dustin, Rocky, and Butch are all stationed here. Further down the line, at the T-switch, is the old signal box, the largest on the island, and between it and the diesel works is the Sodor Power Station. Power from water wheel generators, placed in the raging mountain rivers of Caldi Fell, is moved through cables to the station. From there, it is fed all throughout the island. There are talks of moving to coal generators soon, however. Moving along is Crovan's Gate Station, a small station that serves its community well, behind which is the diesel and steam works, both of which have seen significant updates in past years. Until these works were constructed, engine maintenance was done at the various engine sheds. The diesel works suffered a major fire shortly after the rescue center's construction, which allowed the decrepit building to finally be repaired. Diesel 10, Diesel, Den Dart, Splatter Dodge, Norman Dennis, Paxton Sydney, and Derek all live here. The Steamworks has seen a new engine wash as well as a new repair shed and paint station added. Many of the island's newer engines were constructed at the Steamworks, including Ivo Hugh, Jock, and the Caldi Fells replica of Godred. Victor and Kevin both work here. Nearby, at the mountain's foothills, is the Sodor waste dump, put here in early 1910 as the mountain air helped mask the smell. Rail linkage helped greatly with the island's sanitation efforts, except for the 1937 garbage strike, when the Great Depression saw pay cuts to the island's sanitation workers, causing the protest. When work resumed, Porwith and Scruff had to have bins attached to their bunkers and buffer beams to accommodate the accumulated waste. The town of Crovan's Gate also features the last standing structure from the S&M, the old covered bridge, and the old Crovan's Gate clock tower, which stopped ticking thanks to a lightning strike during a storm in November of 1955. Now we finally come to the Caldi Fell Railway. Opening in 1900, it was and is the only rack railway on the island, using narrow-gauge engines to climb the steep incline to the summit. The line begins just off of the Napford coach yard, where the engines are housed. As they have a face at each end, there is no need for a turntable or loop line. And as it did when it was constructed, the line runs under the original portion of the Maithwaite Bridge to where there is now a transfer point between it and Crovan's Gate Station. From there, the line traverses up the mountain, eventually coming to the summit, where the engines also collect and transport oil down the line as well. Oil deposits had been found in the relatively flat summit of Caldi Fell going back as far as the 1850s, and once railways came to the island, potential profit was recognized. Thus, the railway began construction in late 1895 to serve both the Sodor Oil Company and the growing tourist traffic coming to the mountain. Caldi, Lord Harry, and the newly built Godred replica haul these trains up and down the mountain all day. As the main line curves after the Maithwaite Bridge, we enter Napford, where two major industries keep the town afloat. The first being the Caldi Fell mine on the foot of the mountain's west side, from which all sorts of minerals are taken, and further beyond that is the Sodor Iron Works, where metal from the Wellsworth scrapyard is delivered, melted down, and turned into new steel, which is then shipped to Brendom Docks, and from there the rest of the British Isles. The foundry has been serving the community for some time, beginning its operation in 1875, and seeing many updates as well as benefits from the Sodor Shipping Company and various railway companies' developments of the island. Airy, Bert, and a works diesel live here, and Stepney almost found himself scrapped here several years ago. Beyond the foundry is the massive Napford Station, by far the largest on the island, with its long platform and beautiful canopy roof, which was added to the station when the NWR was completed in 1919. Napford became the site of the railway's head office and the starting point for many of its important services, including Gordon's Express, Thomas's Local, Toby's Quarry Run, and many more. The yard has sidings for both the pilot engines and various rigs of coaches. Philip, Neil, Stafford, Annie, and Clarabelle all live here. Napford Village sits behind the station and is the capital of Sodor. It very much came to prominence thanks to it being the terminus of the TMKR. It has many unique features, including the island's only major school, thanks to its central location on the island, the Catholic church, toy shop, Bob's hot dog stand, an establishment that is loved by all in the village, the Fat Controller's residence conveniently not too far of a walk from the hot dog stand, and of course the large government building constructed in 1800. In the middle of the town square, there is also a monument to all from the island who have lost their lives in overseas conflicts, including several brothers and sons of the Hat family. All three Fat Controllers served and returned to Sodor, however, Sir Topham Hatt I, II, and III in the Boer Wars, First World War, and Second World Wars respectively. Napford is described by those who live there as a peaceful village, and many choose to raise their families here. Bertie the bus and Bulgy the railway bus also both live here. Next to the village, traveling west along the main line, we come to Tidmouth Sheds, which implies a Tidmouth village, however there isn't one, funny enough. You see, Napford and Tidmouth both developed simultaneously during the 19th century, and the sheds were built when the TKMR opened. The village of Tidmouth did still exist when the NWR was completed in 1919, however, Napford had been eclipsing it for some time in terms of infrastructure and population thanks to the steel and mining industries. Thus, Tidmouth Village had faded away entirely by 1925, and everyone had moved to Napford. And thanks to its close proximity to Napford, the engine sheds and yard were simply incorporated into the village, but they kept their Tidmouth name as an homage to the town that no longer remains. Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, Percy, Toby, Henrietta, Emily, and the Sodor Railway Repair all live here. Traveling further west through a series of S-bends is the massive Brendom Docks, which serves as the island's major port and international shipping hub, by far one of the most important locations on the island of Sodor. The docks are owned and operated by the Sodor Shipping Company, which is in turn owned by the NWR. The history of the docks and the SSC is quite fascinating. In 1832, Reginald Brendom came to the island of Sodor. A member of a wealthy mercantile family in Liverpool, Brendom had an eye for business and big plans for the island of Sodor. In the early 1800s, several new industries were popping up on the island, including milling, mining, farming, and several others. This, of course, was prior to railways on the island, and Brendom knew if he could find a way to link these industries and ship the various goods across the island affordably and quickly, he could make some serious money. In 1832, he incorporated the Sodor Shipping Company on the island and set to work building several roadways, canals, workshops, including some at Crovan's Gate, and of course, Brendom Docks, aptly named after himself. The SSC's head offices were located here, and the company with its fleet of carriages, barges, and ships began shipping in 1841, with business booming and continuing to boom even despite Brendom's premature death in 1851, 10 years later. Brendom Docks saw rail linkage with the completion of the BWR in 1872, with the SSC as a primary investor and promoter, hence the railway's name. Business continued successfully even into the NWR's construction, with the SSC and NWR striking a deal, whereby the NWR would construct a larger rail yard at Brendom and a coal hopper for incoming engines if the SSC helped with construction efforts by shipping materials to the railway by road and sea. Hard times came for the SSC, however, by the time of the Great Depression, as the SSC made immense profits during the First World War thanks to munition shipping, and promptly spent all of the money and some more on renovations of many different facilities, new contracts, and an attempt at revitalization of the island's canals, long abandoned since the railways came. With these reserves of money spent, the Great Depression hit the company hard, and the debt piled up, eventually resulting in bankruptcy in 1933. The NWR, however, which had been frugal with its finances thanks to fears of another war or an economic crisis, was able to buy out the SSC and all of its assets. Thus, the SSC continues under NWR ownership to this day, with Brendom Docks retaining its name in honor of the SSC's founder. There have been many updates to Brendom over the years, including a new lighthouse to replace the old hillside one, its own fire brigade, and a brand new crane. Brendom is of course a very bustling place, receiving from not just SSC ships, but also many international ships, including those of the Brio Shipping Company, who many of the dock workers are not so fond of thanks to their careless nature. The docks also serve as an entry point to Sodor for many people, some famous, and even sports teams. Many NWR and SSC engines and adjacent vehicles live and work at Brendom. Rosie, Sonny, Charlie, Stanley, and Billy live in a siding and leave the docks for their jobs each day, while Salty, Porter, Skiff, Cranky, Carly, Madge, Hector, Bulstrode, Captain, 10 Cents, and Sunshine all live and work at the docks. Just southwest of Brendom is Wellsworth, a small historic village. Wellsworth was selected as the main passenger station during the BWR's formation in the late 1860s. The main freight terminus was Brendom, while passenger trains terminated at Wellsworth, and later Brendom once the amount of passenger arrivals became large enough. Wellsworth is one of the older communities on Sodor, having been around for the initial formation of the SSC all those years ago. It has a general store, the West Island Engine Wash, and an Anglican church. The vicar who lives here has an orchard, and Trevor, his traction engine, lives and works here. Edward passes by often and whistles hello. On the far side of the village is the scrapyard. Reg lives here, and all of the island's discarded metal comes here where it is broken up, melted down, or shipped to the ironworks for processing into steel. Nia, Rebecca, and Boko all live here in a siding behind the station. Alrighty, we are on the home stretch. Let's head down the line towards Farquhar. Once past Wellsworth, the line splits in two, both of which wrap around the Farquhar Sheds and Blue Mountain Valley in order to form the loop line. Let's travel down the inner track first. Off to the side immediately is the Sodor China Clay Pits, opened by the Sodor China Clay Company in 1892 when China clay was found there. The SCC is currently sort of a weird amalgamation of several different quarry companies on the island, as by the 1950s, the Farquhar Quarry and Sodor Cement Works closed their doors due to financial difficulties for the cement works and a dry up of materials for the Farquhar Quarry. Thus, the SCC bought out both companies, leading to both companies' equipment and engines being acquired. Now cement is made at the China Clay Pits, and the Farquhar Quarry Company's equipment assists with mining efforts. This is why, alongside Bill, Ben, Marion, and Timothy, the fleet also includes Mavis and Fergus. Craig the Crane also works here, retiring from Brendom Docks where he worked for over 50 years, having his job there now fulfilled by Carly. Moving down the line, there can be workmen seen tearing up old BWR sidings, and just before the switch is a hilly grotto that has two buildings within it. The first being the Grist Watermill, the oldest continually operating business on the island, constructed 1793, and the second being Mrs. Kindley's cottage, Mrs. Kindley being the one who famously saved Thomas and Toby from a landslide on the line all those years ago. Mrs. Kindley's cottage, like the watermill, has access to water, evident by the stream next to her cottage, the water at both buildings coming from a powerful spring in the grotto, which water then runs back into. Now we come back to the loop. The line branches off here towards the sheds, but we will come back to that later. Now as we approach the next bend, we see Farmer Trotter's farm and windmill. Farmer Trotter farms many pigs here, and his windmill is a very famous Sodor landmark by now, thanks to its printing on several postcards and reading material. It isn't the original windmill, however. The original windmill was a wooden structure from 1887, but in 1956 burned down and was replaced by the current brick windmill. There is a small halt nearby where Toby regularly picks up flour, and Elizabeth the steam lorry has for the past few years been working for Farmer Trotter here as well. From here, the line traverses around and through the Blue Mountain Valley, past the Blue Mountain Quarry to Farquhar Station and the sheds. Farquhar was originally the end of the BWR line, and also had connections to the Farquhar Quarry before it closed. Behind it is the Farquhar Sheds, which were built in 1919 at the end of the NWR's construction. The sheds are somewhat of a sore spot for the engines that live there. They are much more cramped than Tidmouth, and the sidings are very claustrophobic, with a massive grievance coming from the old water tower, which was inexplicably built into the far left shed, and even with a new larger water tower just outside the yard, the old tower still takes up space in the shed. Daisy, Ryan, Old Slow Coach, Donald, Douglas, Oliver Toad, Duck, Murdoch, Stephanie, Arthur, and Molly all live here. Alright, we have now reached the end of the standard gauge lines. Let's move on to the narrow gauge section of the island, which, unfortunately, as of today, is only relegated to the Blue Mountain Quarry. The Skarloey Railway and its sister railway, the Mid-Sodor Railway, go back decades in the island's history. The Skarloey Railway being on the island since 1865, and the Mid-Sodor since 1880. Hard times have since hit both, however. The Mid-Sodor, of course, closed in 1947 with its last 4 engines, Stuart, Falcon, Duke, and Freddy, going to the Skarloey, and the Skarloey Railway has since had its line gradually closed until all that remains is the Blue Mountain Quarry at the line's beginning in the Blue Mountain Quarry. Many cite the cause of the Skarloey's decline as both financial but also geographical. Several very harsh winters on the island have reshaped the land in many areas, limiting the space needed to build and rebuild the narrow gauge lines. There is hope that the line will be re-extended again someday, however. The BMQ, which opened up the same time the Skarloey Railway did, is serviced by all the Skarloey Railway locomotives. Skarloey, Rheneas, Peter Sam, Sir Handel, Rusty, Duncan, Fearless Freddy, Ivo Hugh, Luke, Mighty Mac, Owen, and Thumper all live here. And that is my history of the island of Sodor, an AU based on my Thomas and Friends layout. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I certainly did. I definitely wouldn't mind writing some more stuff and making another video like this, so if you want to see that, please tell me in the comments, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, guys!